In this lecture, we'll talk about family grief, how we, as a group, as a family group, talk about that and cope with it. One of the foundations of our study in social work is family systems theory. And theory says that whatever happens to one family member affects all of the family members and as individuals and as a system. And as you have talked about in many of your classes and in this class, family has many different definitions. And for purposes of my practice and your practice, presumably as well, family is whoever your clients say it is. So it may be a traditional family of, husband, wife, children, grandchildren, grandparents, grandchildren, multi-generational, could be a same-sex couple with children, without children, could be an unmarried couple of either sex. And it could be a group of individuals who come together and identify as family. So a family system is the family, however your clients define themselves. So what are some of the factors that affect mourning within a family system? Well, one is the stages of the family life cycle. Just like an individual life cycle, families have life cycle as well. And this is, you'll see here, these stages are just a very rudimentary or very basic level. There's many sub-cycles within this, but, it goes from independence of the individuals to coming together as couples or marrying. Parenting, if that is a decision or something that happens within the couple's life, and parenting babies through adolescence, and then launching adult children, and then retirement or senior years. And as I said, there's many sub-levels of those cycles in there, and there may be couples that do not have children for one reason or another, but they still have different stages in their lives and in their relationships, and all of those things influence how they may react to a significant loss. The role played by the deceased, and we will talk about that more as we continue with this lecture. Power, rules about power, how affection and other things are communicated, what those patterns are within the family, and also socio and cultural factors. When we're assessing grief in the families, we look at what the functional position or the role of the deceased was within the family, the emotional integration of the family, and how the family facilitates or hinders emotional expression, what the rules are in the family for expressing emotions, and how those rules may help or hinder the individuals within the family in expressing their emotions. So, first of all, the functional position or role of the deceased and of other members of the family. Each member of the family plays a role, and sometimes multiple roles within the family. And the death will create a corresponding disturbance of family equilibrium, because there will be a role that will be left unfilled. The family will be deprived of that probably important role. And another family member may step up to fill that role, to fill that vacancy. And that may be a healthy thing, or it may be a somewhat unhealthy thing. For instance, perhaps the person that died was the person who provided the discipline in the family. And so the surviving parent or spouse may take on that role, or one of the children may step up and take that role. So one scenario could be potentially healthy and another could be potentially unhealthy. So, but that is, one thing that will affect how the family is able to mourn in a healthy way. So just like we talk about the tasks of mourning for individuals, families have essential tasks for adapting to a loss as well. And like we discussed with Worden, a family first has to recognize the loss and acknowledge the unique grief experiences that each family member will have. So recognizing the loss and giving permission for each family member to express grief in their own way. There'll be a reorganization of the family system to reassign the role of the loved one, the deceased, or to abandon that role. And what does that look like for role abandonment? One example of that could be that if the deceased was ill for a very long time, in those situations, many times the family becomes organized around the sick person. And so, by necessity. So there's, tasks that have to be completed. Other things, family events have to take into that account. And so everyone's role is sort of different because of the role of the person who is sick, and that family gets organized around that. And so there may be someone else who in their own way takes over the role of the person that is in need of help. And then the family system becomes organized around that person. Or more likely, or in a more healthy way, the family may say, you know what, we love that person and we did our best to care for them, but that role is no longer necessary when we think about our family organization, because we are all healthy, functional people. And so we are going to find another way to organize our family. And so that role, rather than being reassigned, will be abandoned. Another example might be that the family is organized around a matriarch or a male head of the family who makes the decisions, who everyone goes to for advice, and who sort of is responsible for family cohesiveness, sometimes across generations. And when that matriarch or that family leader passes away or dies, the family may decide, you know what, that's not how we're going to organize ourselves anymore. We're going to reassign those roles, we're going to parse them out. And so that role may be reassigned in a way, but in another way, we're going to say, we are not going to have a matriarch anymore. And that may be a conscious decision, or it may just be that there is no one to step up to take that role anymore, because, the family has become more acculturated to a different culture, or just that, people have moved and the way the family relates to each other has become organized in a different way. So those are just a couple of examples of how that role might be those roles might be reassigned or abandoned. Reinvestment in the new family, the new organization, while still maintaining that connection to the deceased loved one. And also a shared understanding, the family develops a shared understanding of the meaning of that loss to them as a family. What does that mean that we that our loved one lived, and what does that mean that they are no longer here with us now? How is our family different? How is our relationship informed with each other, and how we organize each other? So aiding in those tasks, to complete those tasks, we, encourage with our families uh, honest and open communication. And that may be difficult depending on the rules and patterns and norms of the family, and finding different ways to help them to be able to communicate those feelings with each other and giving them permission to experience what they need to in their own way. And one of the ways that can happen too is by use of rituals and ceremonies like funerals, or memorial services, or other ways in which the family can formalize their recognition of the death. So emotional integration, is very an important concept in working with grieving families, because a well integrated family is going to be able to better cope with the death with little outside help. So a well integrated family, this is what it looks like. It's cohesive. They're able to tolerate individual differences, so they understand that each person is going to grieve in their own way, and there's not going to be judgment about that. They have more open communication, and they're open to finding support both within and without and outside of the family system. And they cope actively with problems. They don't avoid them, and they don't deny them. They are active in that respect. A less integrated family may show no grief reaction, or a very small grief reaction at the time of death, but that may result in more internalization of those feelings in the individual family members, and that is later shown in physical or emotional symptoms like angry outbursts, or physical abuse sometimes, or somatic illnesses. So it comes out in other ways. So how do families facilitate or hinder emotional expression? And how do we help families to avoid that, or to do that in a healthy way, rather? So we help the family to determine the value the family places on emotions and the communication patterns, and we help them to develop healthy communication patterns which tolerate the individual differences, and give each other permission to express feelings in their own way, or not express feelings publicly. For instance, I think you heard Marion Mankin talk about a particular family, and the mother was concerned and expressed concern that her kiddos weren't expressing their emotions about the death. And Marion asked, well, how do you express those feelings? How do you do that? And she said, oh yes, I do. I go into my room and I turn on the radio, and I cry, into my pillow so that no one hears. And one of the ways that you can help the mother to facilitate expression of that in her children is to openly express those emotions in front of them herself. So, helping parents or other family members to feel open about expressing their own emotions, and to model that for other family members so that they have that level of comfort. A death is going to, in a family system, disturb the family equilibrium. Each family has, either in a, whether they are a dysfunctional or a healthy functioning family, they will have a family equilibrium, and the death will upset that. And so the priority in working with families is to restore that equilibrium in a healthy way. And families are going to normally, naturally rather, restore that equilibrium, and it may be healthy or it may not be. So in working with those families to help them to do it in a healthy way. And the concerns in restoring family equilibrium are, having relate to expression of emotions, finding meaning, and working on being able to function daily in day-to-day activities, like being able to eat and dress and perform those functions that keep us going. So in helping a family, we want to help them to find ways, develop roles and norms to encourage each individual to be able to experience and express their intense emotions, to help the family together to be able to express emotions and to accept differences in those emotions, and to encourage them to reach out to extended family and communities, both for support in managing those day-to-day tasks for daily living, and also to interpret the meaning of the loss, and likewise to rely on cultural rituals and norms to interpret the meaning and determine meaning of the loss, and also to find support for daily living. So some of the major concerns in addressing family equilibrium and family grief and loss, helping family cope with grief and loss, is sometimes families will use emotional avoidance as a stabilizing strategy. If we don't talk about it, if we don't express it, then we're not going to be upset about it, and everything will be, we'll just go on. And that, as I said before, can lead to individuals internalizing those feelings and not expressing them, and they come out in unhealthy ways. A family may triangulate as a stabilizing structure, and they may triangulate, parents may triangulate children. If it's a spouse that died, they could triangulate with children, or if it's a child that dies, they could triangulate with a surviving child, or they could triangulate the person that died. So, for instance, that might look like, if there is a conflict within the family, they would be like, well, mom trusted me more than she trusted you. So I think, my opinion on this needs to have more weight because, mom gave me this responsibility, or, just the opposite, mom or dad, or, this, the family member that died, couldn't be trusted, and you're just like them. So, I'm the one that should make this decision, or I'm the one that should have this, or, so that's just an example, some examples of how the person that died may be the subject of triangulation. And then some families may decide to conceive a replacement child upon the death of a child in the home. And that may or may not be problematic depending on the family's integration and the family's intent and approach to that. it could be a healthy and healing thing as well. So, and that is, when you're talking about the loss of a child, which is, a devastating loss within a family, the replacement child consideration comes up again when we talk about that. But again, it could be a problematic thing, particularly for the child, the new child, but it could also be a healing thing for the family, depending upon the approach of the family and their understanding. And, it could be, we conceive this child to honor our deceased child, not to replace them. And that child grows up, learning about their sibling that has died. So, and sometimes that's not an option. Sometimes, because of, the age of the parent, or because of, other considerations, sometimes, people are able to adopt a child. And in any event, it could be, a meaning-making event. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative, or something that's a denial, or an avoidance tactic. With the death of a child, there could be expectations placed on surviving children that may be difficult or harmful. You have to go on and live your life, not only for you, but also for your sibling that has died, or all the expectations that were placed on the deceased child are now yours. They were star athlete or whatever, and so now that's your role. There was a movie many years ago, but it's an excellent movie that I sometimes use in this course. Sorry about that. Called Ordinary People. And that was a very stark study of the expectations of one deceased child being placed, or that the child that remains becomes the disappointment because they are not the child that died. So those kinds of things are sometimes problematic within a family that's lost a child. Need for placing blame, if there was an accident, or even if it's an illness, or sometimes placing blame is not a rational act. Maybe this happened because you're an alcoholic, and that brought the wrath of God on our family. So it may not always be a rational thing, but there may be a need to place blame. An understanding or a lack of understanding of different grieving styles. I am so upset and I'm crying all the time, but my spouse doesn't seem to care about what happened. Whereas, your spouse is grieving, but in a different way. And one of the things that we can do as clinicians, as counselors, is to help families to both recognize those different styles, and also to help maybe the person that grieves more privately to feel comfortable in expressing that grief more publicly, and to model that with other family members. The other thing about the loss of a child is it's often thought that there's a higher risk of divorce in those families, but it's kind of heartening to note that most studies conclude that that's really a myth. And I've heard lots of different scenarios on that, depending on the age of the child, or the length of the marriage. But overall, It's like even those scenarios maybe have been exaggerated, and that divorce in those situations occurs usually when there are problems in the marriage prior to the death of the child. So it's not attributed solely to that death, but it's just maybe the last straw in uh, a long list of straws for that marriage. So certainly this is a devastating loss for a family, and for a couple in particular. But these are some considerations and some of the things that we can do to assist and encourage.